Okay, so pretty much everyone has talked about this, and let's discuss this as well. This is one of those holy cow moments. Yeah, because it's a cow, get it? Anyway, hello wonderful person, this is Anton, and today we're going to discuss this really intriguing and somewhat bizarre study that focuses on a group of animals that we often see as very simple-minded and not particularly smart. We're talking about cows. But this particular cow surprised everyone, and that's because Veronika right here presented us with the first official evidence that cows can actually learn to use tools and can do so quite intelligently. Although in this case, she's basically just using this to scratch herself. She's not really solving math problems or trying to create some kind of a helicopter. Yet nevertheless, this is a really interesting study and a really interesting discovery, which basically means that in this video we're going to be discussing some of the more recent and somewhat unusual discoveries when it comes to bovine intelligence. Because as we've learned in the last few years, these animals are not that simple after all, and they do possess some relatively complex features inside their brain. But it was really this discovery that kind of shocked the scientific community, because this has never been seen before. And so let's actually start with this specific cow, Veronika, a Swiss brown cow that has now officially changed our understanding of ruminant intelligence and proved to us that tool use is not reserved to primates, birds, dolphins, and certain octopuses. Other animals seem to be able to use tools as well. But once again, in this case, it's really just for scratching, which is of course kind of funny on its own. But in this case, what was surprising for the scientists was not the fact that she was scratching herself, it was actually how she adapted to use this tool. Because in this case, when researchers gave her a broom, she didn't just rub against it or use it the same way every single time. She was able to identify that bristles were much better for the thick hide, while the smooth handle was much better for the sensitive parts, like on her belly. And so she would actually switch the broom from one end to the other, depending on what part was itchy. And surprisingly, she even adjusted her physical grip and the intensity of movements. So she was able to use this in different ways for different body parts. In more scientific terms, this is what scientists refer to as multi-purpose tool use. And this type of a behavior is actually quite rare outside of humans. As a matter of fact, it's mostly really been observed in chimps. Now, some birds are also able to adapt this, but usually in only extremely rare cases. And so it was really the multi-purpose tool use in this case that was particularly shocking. Which is in essence what the study by Anton, Osuna, Mascaró and Alice Orsberg is all about. Here, scientists conducted a relatively thorough scientific analysis, confirming that this was indeed the first example of multi-purpose tool use outside of chimps. With this discovery suddenly opening up a much larger question. What else do we know about how cows think? And what else are they capable of? Because it turns out that some of the previous studies also discovered that they don't just solve problems, they also seem to actually enjoy doing so. And in just the last 6 to 7 years, there's been quite a few studies on this bovine intelligence that have been kind of surprising. You can find some of them in the links in the description below. But so far the conclusion is the same. These animals that we thought were not particularly smart are actually way smarter than we ever thought. And so in one study from University of Cambridge, researchers actually challenged cows to figure out how to open a door and to reach food, which they actually did pretty fast. But it was really what happened afterwards that surprised them. When all of them were able to solve the puzzle, researchers noticed something absolutely remarkable. In every single case, for every cow, the heart rate increased. And on top of this, some of them even performed what scientists sometimes refer to as joy jumps. So yeah, they were jumping for joy, with their brainwaves also showing clear signs of excitement, similar to a kind of a eureka moment a human might feel when they solve some kind of a puzzle. And that of course suggests that for cattle, intellectual challenge itself seems to provide a sense of achievement. And that was actually a really shocking discovery, something that once again we haven't seen a lot in many different species. But beyond individual problem solving, cows also have incredibly social and very sophisticated lives, with complex structures that are not just following the herd, which is of course the stereotype we usually have for cows. And so here multiple studies discover that cows can usually recognize at least 50 individual members of their herd, but more importantly can even distinguish between familiar and unfamiliar humans. Okay, that part might be kind of obvious, but what's less obvious is the fact that they then also form what scientists refer to as preferred associations, or I guess what we humans call best friends. In other words, cows actually have best friends. And it's not just about standing next to each other, it actually seems to provide a biological benefit, or what we refer to as a social buffering, and there are several examples of this from various studies. For example, a cow in a stressful situation, such as being examined by a vet, will usually experience much lower heart rate and a lot less stress hormones if they're allowed to stay next to their so-called best friend. Or essentially, if the cow has a best friend cow and you put them together, they seem to feel a lot more comfortable no matter what. And on top of this, their best friends and cows themselves seem to also have names. And so based on recent bioacoustic research, scientists discovered that cows have individual voice signatures that they often use to communicate identity through sound. And a lot of these vocal patterns remain stable independent if the cow is happy or stressed, which actually allows the entire herd to basically know who's moving and what they're possibly moving about. Or basically it allows them to determine the member of the herd. And this vocal individuality helps them maintain social bonds and very likely attracts support from peers when they're in trouble. Or at least that's the assumption for now. But what's certain is that they definitely make their own sounds and have a very specific voice that seems to be recognized by others. But perhaps one of the more unusual discoveries from the last few years is actually in regards to their memory, and I guess specifically, the cow's grudge. And that's because they also tend to remember different interactions, with cows apparently holding long-term grudges even for many years. And so if a person or another cow treats them really poor, they tend to remember this and tend to avoid this person even after years of not seeing them. Conversely, they also remember positive handling and will usually be much more friendly to a person who's been kind to them. But this does not just apply to social interactions, this also goes back to that puzzle solving. Cows have also been shown to solve complex mazes and remember the solution for at least 6 weeks. And in some training tasks, they even can remember things for up to a year. Which once again is maybe just a little bit unusual. But I think one of the strangest papers and one of the strangest discoveries was probably this, the Mooloo, or basically potty training for cows. And this was actually one of the most practical and more surprising examples from back in 2021. And so here in this somewhat unusual experiment, researchers used a method referred to as Mooloo to teach cows or baby cows to basically go pee-pee and poo-poo in a certain spot. And so they would basically only urinate in a very specific spot as you see in this video. And though this might not sound particularly impressive, especially if you have cats and dogs, in terms of biological intelligence, it is actually really important because it actually shows us that first of all, even as calves, they're able to demonstrate what's known as interoceptive awareness. They're able to sense signals coming from inside their own bodies, knowing when their bladder is full, but more importantly, they can then maintain a kind of a self-control. They're able to override their natural reflexes and wait until they reach a certain area to relieve themselves. And incredibly, all of these calves were able to learn all of this much faster than human toddlers. And so they actually acquired these skills surprisingly fast. Which of course once again suggests that generally, cows seem to have a relatively high level of awareness, at least in regards to their own internal states. Which basically means that here we have several different studies that challenge a lot of long-standing assumptions about intelligence, but specifically about the cognitive abilities of livestock. So for example, evidence of the multi-purpose tool use, where different parts of the same object are used for different functional goals, and basically evidence for a lot of abilities, including complex behaviors, that are often associated with animals much closer to humans. And even based on this study of Veronika, we now have official proof that these animals are capable of anticipatory behavior and can basically predict how a tool will feel on their body. But they also have executive control, allowing them to use physical action for certain types of purposes. But I guess there's still one question. Are cows actually getting smarter, or is this something that was always there and we just never noticed? And well, the real answer is probably the latter. Here the authors suggest that such behavior might actually be pretty common, but we just never really observed it. And mostly because scientists rarely look for tool use in food animals or livestock. And so we might have actually missed a wide range of complex behaviors in a lot of different species we interact with every day. But obviously there are some ethical implications coming out of this as well, especially when it comes to the animal treatment and animal welfare. And so it's not just about knowing that cows can be smart, it's also about knowing that they can possess higher cognitive functions and seem to be much smarter than we ever thought. It also suggests that they may require mental enrichment and complex environments in order to feel comfortable. So basic physical care that's usually provided is definitely not enough. And so all of these studies essentially show us that allowing cows to actually interact with stuff and providing them with a cognitively enriching environments, basically environments where they can solve problems or interact with friends, will definitely dramatically improve their mental state and thus obviously improve their welfare. But the bottom line here is that cows are definitely not some simple, dumb animals, and instead seem to be really complex and possess individual lives with a lot of social and cognitive requirements. And based on Veronika right here, this also now redefines what we thought about tools. Because here was always believed to be the realm of animals with hand-eye coordination, or specifically animals that hunt and forage and sometimes use tools to catch their prey. Yet for Veronika right here, the use seems to be just a little bit more, I guess, egocentric. This cow just wants to scratch herself. And this shows us that tool use can actually evolve in different contexts and can be driven by entirely different physical necessities. But importantly, for biological sciences and for cognitive sciences, this actually opens up a new door for research that does not involve usual suspects. Not dolphins, not crows, not primates. Here, scientists can now start focusing on cows. And it also opens the door to something referred to as comparative cognition, looking at how different body shapes influence how brain solves different problems. And so in short, the study on Veronika does not necessarily tell us that this is some kind of an Einstein cow, but instead tells us that we've dramatically underestimated the minds of animals living on farms, and we definitely have to reassess our assumptions. And so the actual gap between the bovine and human mind might be not as large as we previously thought. But we'll definitely come back and discuss this more once there's some additional discoveries, especially about cognition of other animals, and maybe some other studies on cows as well. Until then, thank you for watching, subscribe, come back tomorrow to learn something else, support this channel on Patreon where you can find additional videos without any ads and can DM me directly, or by joining a channel membership that grants you early access. You can also support this channel by buying the Wonderful Person t-shirt in the description below. Stay wonderful, I'll see you tomorrow, and as always, bye bye.